My name is Shirley Loebmiller. I'm the warden at Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women. Today on For Women Only, as guest of Dimple McInvale, we'll be interviewing some individuals who are serving on the Freeba Choice program. The Freeba Choice program is sponsored by the Department of Corrections. It involves inmates who are willing to tell their life story of an involvement with drugs and crime. They only tell it in order that you, the public, might have some better understanding of why they are incarcerated and that you might not do the things that they did which brought them to their place in prison. Today we have with us Officer Clower, who is one of the sponsors of the Freeba Choice program. He is a correctional officer, sergeant, who takes the inmates to the schools. We do programs in schools from the first grade through university studies of criminal justice system down to social studies work. There is an ever-growing interest in the drug culture and what we can do to change it. And these men with me today have agreed to speak their story in order that you might understand something about how you get to be involved in drugs and what happens after you once get involved in drugs. They're not happy stories, and they're not happy to have to tell them. They've worked very hard to be able to control their emotions during the time they tell their stories. So you might think they show no remorse, they show no concern for what has happened to individuals who have been victims of theirs. That is not the case. It is that they have rehearsed and practiced in order to be effective in this ministry of saving people from a life of crime. Today we have with us Sean and we have with us Paul. And I'm going to let them tell you something about themselves, where they're incarcerated and why they're incarcerated, and a little bit about how they got involved with drugs. After they get to talking, we'll ask some questions and Officer Clower will join us. Okay, Sean, we'll start with you today.
Greetings, my name is Sean. I'm serving a 10-year sentence at Franklin Prison. During the age of 14, I always, like all kids, wanted to have the better things in life, like nice houses, cars, jewelry, clothing. Well, about that time, a young man approached me, and he seemed to see the glare in my eye. He told me, he said, Sean, I know that you're a young man that like things, fine things like cars and houses and clothing and jewelry. He said, I'm going to show you how to acquire those things. And he told me, he said, Sean, in order to acquire those things, I'm going to give you a package. And he gave me that package. I took that package and I went out. And he told me, say, sell this package and bring me the money back, and I will give you another one in return. So after I carried him that package, I did exactly as I was instructed to do. I brought him the package back, and he gave me another one. And that's when my life began to go downhill. I started selling drugs. And when I started selling drugs, I began to acquire the things that he had told me. I began to have a new car. I acquired jewelry and clothing, and I began to say to myself that this guy really knew what he was talking about. He had really told me something that I didn't know. But then I was dreaming. But I woke up from that dream, and I began to face reality. And like I said, during the reality part of that dream, I'm now serving a 10-year sentence at Franklin Prison. And I began to know that the things that I had accumulated, that I lost them, all because of drugs. And as I sit here and speak to you today, there's someone out there right now that are losing their life to drugs and alcohol. So I say to you, please, stay away from drugs and alcohol. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I hope that those people out there who have listened to Sean have been able to relate to him in some way. If you're not a drug user, perhaps you know someone who is. And if you can talk with that person and you can convince them that Sean's story is not one they want to repeat, that they don't want to have the same problems that Sean has, to have to be a young man spending time in prison. How old are you, Sean?
24.
24 years old.
Yes,
You have a family out there?
yes, ma'am.
And how do you think they feel about your being in prison?
I know that they are hurt. They're
They're
very
hurt.
hurt.
Usually the family becomes victims of the crimes that other individuals commit. And would you say that your family is truly a victim of your crime?
Yes, ma'am.
They're suffering along with you during your incarceration. Thank you, Sean. We'll get back to you later. Okay, Paul, tell us something about yourself and why you're in prison. And I know you're not happy about it. I wouldn't be happy about it if I had to be incarcerated.
Well, I was a teenager during the years when drugs first started getting real popular, and it was the end thing to do to smoke dope and drink and experiment with other things like acid. And the whole teenage population seemed to be interested in doing this sort of thing at the time, and I got involved in it along with all my friends and spent several years wasting my time and wasting my money. And after a while, about 10 years ago, I found out that I had a bad heart and some respiratory problems, which probably drugs had a lot to do with. And I decided if I was going to live, I had to get away from the drugs. And I did. I stopped using the drugs and used alcohol only moderately when I went out to clubs. And my problem was, though, I was so interested in the people and knew so many people that were into the drugs and into the alcohol that they were my friends. So I kept hanging around the places where they would be, and I was into gambling and liked to shoot pool, and it was usually a lot of easy marks around that you could take money from when they were high or drunk. And of course the women were a lot easier. And I thought I had distanced myself enough, though, by the fact that I had quit using drugs and only drank moderately, and that nothing could go wrong for me. Until one night I was in a bar and two men started a fight with me, and when I tried to leave, they wouldn't allow me to leave. And this fight resulted in one of the men dying. And for that reason, I'm pulling a 20-year sentence with the Department of Corrections at Staten Correctional Facility.
Paul, do you have a family also out there?
Yes, I do.
How do you think your family feels about your situation?
I know how they feel. They've told me many times, and my mother cries still, even after being incarcerated 4 years. And it hurt all of them.
A mother doesn't stop loving her child when that child does wrong, but a mother hurts for her child. And I think each of the individuals who are incarcerated are very fortunate to have a family member who supports them, mother, brother, sister. They need that support more now than they ever have. Not that the family will condone nor approve of the conduct of their family member, but that those individuals will give support to those family members by being there for them when they need them the most. And I know that one of those things is important is visitation. Do you get visits, Paul?
Sometimes. I have a friend that visits occasionally, and my family lives out of state. They live in Virginia and North Carolina. And my sister has made it down to see me one time since I've been incarcerated.
And Sean, what about visitation for you?
I'm eligible for visit, but since, like Paul, my family's live out of state, and I haven't had one since I've been incarcerated.
Okay, what state does your family live
In the state of Georgia.
in? The state of Georgia, so they don't get over quite often. Getting out on the Free by Choice program does give you the opportunity to see what's happening in the world and to have some contact with people other than just the inmates where you're incarcerated. So hopefully that gives you a perspective on what's happening out there. I know that when you see the faces of young people and you look out over the classes that you're talking to, that your heart has to break when you're able to recognize them. I think Officer Clower, Sergeant Clower, can tell us sometimes perhaps what he looks at and sees in the audience of the young people there, and how many times the inmates have pointed out certain people that they feel are on drugs. Sergeant Clower, would you tell the audience something about your experience as a freedom of choice supervisor?
As we travel the state, and we go anywhere in the state of Alabama, it's amazing that the people do not understand what the laws of Alabama are. For instance, we go to a high school, and the children or the students in school are absolutely shocked when they find out that at 14 years old, they are old enough to go to prison. This shocks them, and it shocks the adults when they find out that, like Sean. Sean, what are you convicted of?
The unlawful distribution of a controlled substance, to wit cocaine.
An unlawful distribution of a controlled substance. What did the state take away from you? Did you get to keep the money, the cars, the jewelry?
No, all that was taken away from me. Also my freedom and my pride and dignity.
What were you convicted of?
Manslaughter.
Manslaughter. In an action that took place probably in less than 2 minutes. He was a free man and then convicted of manslaughter. And when you do this, what did you lose?
I had a small business that was doing real well, and I lost all the equipment I had. Everything that I had is just gone. I'll have to start over completely.
People don't realize that the laws in the state of Alabama are absolutely devastating on people who insist on using drugs and alcohol. Therefore, I think this program is vitally important to the general public in the state of Alabama, to inform them that what the laws are, and to also inform them that ignorance of the law is no excuse. You break the law today, you best find out what the consequences are, because the consequences are there, and you could pay for them for the rest of your life.
Thank you, Sergeant Clower. Perhaps you're a school teacher. Perhaps you're a civic leader. Perhaps you're a student in some college class. Or perhaps you're a student in high school or grammar school. If you're interested in the Freedom of Choice program and you would like to have some representative from the Department of Corrections, namely an inmate escorted by armed, uniformed officers, to come to your institution, civic club meeting, or school, you may feel free to call the Department of Corrections in Montgomery at 242-9400. I'll repeat that number, 242-9400. That's the Department of Corrections. The person with whom you would wish to speak would be Mrs. Deborah Herbert or Mr. John Hale. They will talk to you about having an inmate come to your school or civic meeting to talk to the individuals in your club or your school about the laws of the land and the use of drugs and the penalties for using or selling drugs in the state of Alabama. I encourage you, get every bit of the information you can about drugs, about the abuse of drugs. There are many problems that arise as the use of drugs continues to grow in the United States. One of those problems is the use of dirty needles. Do either of you know of anyone who is HIV positive as the result of the use of tainted needles? Do you, Sean?
Yes, ma'am.
Have you ever had any close contact with these individuals or experienced anything?
Yes, ma'am. I have known them personally as friends, relatives, even just classmates, schoolmates that I once knew once upon a time in my life.
And they're AIDS-infected individuals as a result of bad needles,
Yes, ma'am.
passing them between people who are HIV positive. This is a very deadly disease. You need to be aware of this when you're thinking about using needles in the use of drugs. Paul, have you ever had occasion to come in contact with any HIV positive individuals?
I have a friend that I went to school with that my sister told me just recently that he had tested positive for HIV.
How did you feel about that when you got that news?
I was shocked, and I felt really bad because he was not a good friend, but somebody that I knew, somebody that was close to me, and it's just something you don't expect.
Something you don't expect. Sergeant Clower, do you ever have contact with any individuals who might have used bad needles and are HIV positive?
Yes, ma'am, that's one of the most common problems that we encounter. People are shooting drugs, want the drugs so desperately they care not whether the syringe or the needle are clean or dirty. Sometimes I think they'll pick one up off the street out of the garbage can and use it because they've got to have that shot. Once they become addicted, they will do anything to get that drug in their system. Too many times this produces AIDS.
A lot of the incarcerated individuals are incarcerated as the result of illegal use or sales of drugs. They didn't start out intending to get arrested and incarcerated. I think very few of them would even say they thought about it ever happening to them. They probably thought it happens to the other feller down the street. This could never happen to me. That's a total foreign language that you're speaking when you talk about criminals and incarceration. And yet, one day they wake up, having been caught in the clutches of sin and criminal activities, and they find that they have a drug problem. It's either stealing to get the money to buy the drugs, or selling the drugs, or having use and contact with the drugs, and knowing people who have lost a good lifestyle simply because of involvement with drugs, getting into criminal activities, all because of drugs. We want to encourage the public, stay away from drugs. There's another problem that exists as well as illegal drugs, and that is the use and misuse of prescription drugs. We have incarcerated a number of individuals who have, by prescription, gotten and used legal drugs. They use them in excess, they begin to forge prescriptions, and to do other criminal activities in order to obtain good, clean, legal drugs. They ultimately have wound up in prison. Don't misuse drugs. If your doctor prescribes drugs for you, take those drugs as prescribed. If you fear that you are becoming addicted, go back to your doctor, seek advice from medical professionals, and attempt to come off of drugs as soon as possible. By no means do you want to forge prescriptions or get drugs illegally in any way. If you are a young person and you're approached by someone who wants to give you a packet, and I think you said, Sean, that someone came and wanted to give you a packet?
Yes, ma'am.
Don't accept those packets. Those packets have in them death itself in the form of illegal drugs. If you get caught by those drugs and become addicted to those drugs, you will become criminally involved sooner or later. There's no question in my mind about this happening to you. I see too many people on a daily basis that this has happened to them. So young people, when someone wants to give you something, be sure the price is very expensive. It is not free. And if someone approaches you to want to give you a good job just selling a few packets every once in a while, know that there's a price to pay for that too. You will be apprehended ultimately, and you will serve time in a prison because of your criminal activities. If there's anything that we could say to stop people from using drugs, what would you say to them, Sean?
Please stay away from them, and stay away from anyone who come around you with them.
Thank you, Sean. Paul, what would you say to the public?
Any kind of association with drugs, whether you're a user or just hang around with people who do use drugs, can ultimately lead you to a terrible downfall.
And Sergeant Clower, what would your closing message to the public be?
Drugs are deadly, and it matters not whether you're using or selling. It becomes habit forming. I have known people who have never used drugs, but they formed a habit of wanting the money that drugs could give them. And once again, whether you're using or selling, it's a habit that can only be broken by the local police, the state of Alabama, and the Department of Corrections. You're going to wind up in prison. Be smart and don't start.
When we say free by choice, we mean that these persons have chosen to be free by not using drugs. It has been ultimately their choice. They can get drugs. Let's face it, if anyone wants something badly enough, they can obtain it. Unfortunately, we do everything that we can to keep them from it. But unfortunately, they're going to get those drugs. So these individuals who participate in this program are doing it because they are free to do it. It is their choice. They are in control of their lives at this point. We hope that they will become rehabilitated, that they will re-enter society, and that as they re-enter society, they will know that they do not want to use drugs nor abuse drugs. They will know that they don't want to obtain nor sell drugs, and they will want to steer other individuals clear of doing that, which is the important part of free by choice. We encourage you, be free, make it your choice not to use drugs. Excuse me. My tongue always gets tangled up when I get so excited about something. And I'm excited about the fact that people are learning that drugs are deadly and that they don't need to use them, that they don't need to abuse them. And each and every time I get the opportunity to talk to the public, I will talk to the public and tell them, don't use drugs. They can only bring heartache and pain and suffering and sorrow, as these individuals have testified to you today. God does not intend for us to be miserable in life. And He doesn't intend for us to get those highs that drugs bring us, because they're only temporary and they bring us down so quickly and they bring us down so far, so fast, that certainly they're not the high that you think you're going to get when you get on those drugs. Again, we want to thank you, the public, for tuning into our program today. We want to thank you for every opportunity that you give us in the Department of Corrections to be of service to the public by making Free by Choice available through the speaking engagements to the inmates. Again, if you would be interested in having a Free by Choice program at your church, your school, civic organization, wherever you might be, please call 242-9400, Montgomery, Alabama. That number again is 242-9400, Montgomery, Alabama, and speak with Ms. Deborah Herbert or Mr. John Hale and ask for a program speaker on the Free by Choice program. They'll help you select a date. Thank you for sharing with us today, and we look forward to being with you again sometime soon. Have a good day and stay away from drugs. Just say no. Okay, guys.
Amen.
Just say no.